All right, now to battleground New Brunswick, where they are not talking about subways, folks, I guarantee you that. But they are talking about roads, about schools, crumbling bridges. And here's a fact I bet you didn't know. 293 of the province's 2,600 bridges are in, quote, poor condition. That's better than 1 in 10 bridges in that province that has the worst rating the Auditor General there can give a bridge. Well, a chance tomorrow to lay out a plan to fix those bridges, build new schools, new roads, as Premier David Alward's Progressive Conservative government presents the last budget of its first mandate. Voters will head to the polls this fall, and of course, Premier Alward would like a second mandate. Former top Conservative here in Ottawa, David McLaughlin, joins us now. New Brunswick needs a lot of work, but New Brunswick is broke and getting broker. It's not a fun... You said, and when you were working with Minister Flaherty, had night before budgets where the news wasn't going to be all good, but there's good stories to tell. Is there some good stories for David Alward's government to get up and start talking about tomorrow?
Well, it's a lot better to be Premier of New Brunswick when you have some money to spend, I can tell you. And times are always tough in Atlantic Canada. New Brunswick is really going through some tough financial times. This is, in many ways, a make or break it budget for Premier Alward. It's the last budget, as you said, before the election in September. The deficit has been increasing, not decreasing, despite...
they had to revise some numbers just before Christmas?
Absolutely, and the deficit went up.
Yep.
So, you know, watch for that deficit number in tomorrow's budget for this fiscal year, 2013-14. See whether it stays at that $538 million or whether it goes up. And then watch for what they're projecting next year, because next year you'll see the full effect of the tax hikes that they brought into effect in last year's budget. So if they're not showing any progress there on the fiscal front, that's going to be real political trouble for them.
And we've already seen ministers, Finance Minister Blaine Higgs was out telegraphing that don't expect big spikes in spending plans. It's going to be par for the course. So they're already sort of laying that line down.
They're trying to condition people for that. But I think after 3 years, people are well conditioned, and we're seeing it in the polls. The government is in some pretty tough political territory as a result of that. And that's always tough. You know, when you're cutting all the time, you're not going to find a lot of public support. But the public will be there if they think they're making progress. They get that, you know, you've got to, you know, pare things back. But the real problem as well is that the economy is just not performing well. So you're not getting the kinds of revenues in there. So your only option, if you're in government and you want to get the deficit down, is to cut or raise taxes. They've done both. Let's see where they end up on that front.
On last Thursday, this sort of the yin to the budget yang. Last Thursday, Premier Alward gave his State of the Province address. I like the idea of the State of the Province address. I understand it's a 50-year-old tradition out there.
I've written a few myself.
Yes, there you are. So the State of the Province address, and really spent a lot of time saying, you know, times are bad, but you know what our salvation in New Brunswick is? Doubling down on resource development. He announced a forestry program, details TBD, fine. But also saying, listen, we have got to exploit our natural gas development. And really that is going to differentiate him going through the next year against the Liberals and New Democrats.
What you heard was the ballot question being set out by the Premier. We're pro-development, we're pro-jobs. The Liberal leader in the Liberal Party wants to have a moratorium on shale gas development. Now, not surprising, because the Liberal leader's riding is right in the midst of that territory. So you've got some local community uproar going on, and he's playing into that. But I think if Premier Alward can really wedge himself against the Liberal Party and the NDP, which is gaining some ground, they're in pretty strong third place there. You know,
never had win a seat.
Well, they had one for a while. They need to, but they could start to take the seats away from the Conservatives on the splits here. So they're in some dangerous territory for David Alward. But if he can wedge this on him being pro-development, pro-economy, and pro-jobs, and take a hard line, as he appears to be doing on shale gas, you know, then that's got that point of differentiation. I mean, New Brunswickers know that there's no sunny days like immediately.
But this is the closest thing to a lottery ticket if this can be harnessed effectively.
Well, and that's the argument he's been making. Like this plus in St. John with the Energy East pipeline coming into the St. John refinery. So he's got a kind of an energy 1-2 punch that his opponents don't have. The question is, how well can he play that and get the voters to buy into that at the same time while he's cutting government services and raising taxes. So tomorrow's budget really has to reinforce that State of the Province theme.
The energy debate here, we saw a little taste of it in Nova Scotia, although everybody's against fracking there. But in this particular one, I think this is an important election for the country, because if Alward can succeed, he will have succeeded in saying, I can build the social license for this sort of thing. And you well know from your work on the Environment Roundtable that sometimes governments in Canada forget about that part. You just can't start beating up. And if Alward can do that, that could be a template for other governments.
Well, absolutely. I think it is a critical election for the country in that respect. I mean, BC had a critical election on a carbon tax. And then Gordon Campbell got re-elected. So it's now in play. Every other province has put a hold on shale gas development or really sort of pulled back a bit, but not New Brunswick. So it is really important in that respect for the industry and for, as you say, building that kind of social license.
He started on 30 wells, he noted in his speech.
Yes.
30 natural gas wells already been fracked. No problems. Everybody's doing fine.
The environmental impacts have not been as negative as people anticipated. But what you've got is just this core group of people who are not willing to buy into it in any way. So he's got to keep putting information out, and he's got to keep doing this in order to show that it can work. Over time, people will buy into it. But for what you got to ask yourself the question: what else does New Brunswick have in terms of generating economic growth? So I think he's picked the right issue. We'll see how it plays out politically.
He's got the hard deadline coming right up.
Oh, absolutely. There's no escaping it. This thing is coming down the path.
All right, David McLaughlin, thank you so much for coming in.